As we've come into September, I have to admit I've had some real resistance to the word atonement. When you hear the word, it's almost always in conjunction with another word I'm not crazy about, sins, as in atonement for our sins. You can atone for mistakes, but that's not really the way that it's used. As we looked for images and songs about atonement online in the general community, I was somewhat appalled by some of what we saw. It featured guilt-ridden looking people being forgiven, usually by men in authority. Not really the kind of faith life, spiritual life that I yearn to lead, looking for men in authority to forgive me for my sins. So I can kind of feel like, oh, that has nothing to do with me. Until it comes to issues like privilege. And that's where language about atonement and sins actually has some resonance for me in my own life. You know, you might not have noticed this, so I'm going to tell you, I'm white. I'm a white person. I benefit every day in so many ways I can't even count by being white. And not everyone has what I have with this. I have a 16-year-old non-white kid who's often pointing out to me ways that I benefit from white privilege. So this kid of mine has got me pretty hyper aware of all the ways that today I benefit from white privilege, but I don't really know that that exactly takes me to needing atonement. That takes me needing consciousness and being awake and being aware that I have something not everybody has and using it responsibly. Where I come into a place of really trying to figure out how to walk in balance is the issues of violence that are part of white privilege. The military power that first enforced the privileges that now I can kind of walk around in without having to assert them at all. For instance, today I'm filming at Fort Snelling. Right now we're marking here in Minnesota 150 years from the worst atrocity, the worst mass murder that this country has ever seen. A mass hanging of Dakota people. And even today, as people try to tell this story, I can't believe the ways that white people can't say, oh my God, we were so wrong, but really want to say, well, the Indians were violent first. You can read it. There's this article that just made my blood boil called The No-Win War. It was in the Minnesota Monthly, a magazine I subscribe to, and it purports that no one won this war. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, I kind of think my people won it. I mean, in 1863, the Dakota Expulsion Act said that no Dakota people could even live in the state of Minnesota. How do you call that a no-win war? And you know, that's never even been repealed. Still the books today. So how do I walk around with that? Well, in that article that made me so angry, there was a woman named Sandy Gashik. And Sandy Gashik shared what she thought it would take to really create reconciliation. You know, Minnesota tried a few years back to have, oh, we're reconciled now. You know, that's a great idea, to just be reconciled. But it doesn't really work. I think atonement actually demands some work. So the first thing that she says is needed is acknowledgement of what was done before, during, and after this war. Now, something that's important to say out loud is that white people need to learn to believe non-white people about their history. I will say that as part of white privilege, I've inherited this belief of superiority that really has taught me that white people are just smarter, we just know more. And as long as we carry that belief and don't challenge it, it's going to be dominant because this culture reinforces it every day by who's in charge. Even if in my country we do have an African American president, it doesn't undo the history. So the first thing she says is that we need to contextualize. And then she says we need an apology. We want the governor to apologize for what happened. The third thing that we need to do is to teach the history to kids so that it's carried, so that it's in the Minnesota schools, so that what happened isn't forgotten. We need a day of remembrance. In the United States, we celebrate as a federal holiday Columbus Day in October. Many of us have already renamed Columbus Day as Indigenous Peoples Day, and I think for those of us in Minnesota, it would make sense for Indigenous Peoples Day to really center on this history. Finally, we need to repeal the Dakota Expulsion Act. How appalling that it's still on the books that in my state, the people who lived here for hundreds of years are legally not allowed to live here. How appalling that that hasn't been repealed. As I said, I live about 4 miles from Fort Snelling, where the hangings took place, where people were forced to camp by the river for months. Many women and children died. Then they were forced to march 150 miles. And finally, I want to find a place to mourn. I want to mourn in community with Dakota people. I want to mourn, grieve, and name this as the tragedy and the heartbreak that it is. I want to honor the descendants of those people who were treated so badly. I know that each of you comes from a place with a distinctive and unique history, just as I do. And I'm curious to learn how you're relating to that history, how you're claiming your place as someone with privilege or without, and finding atonement, finding at-one-ment in that community.